And everybody, believe me, this is a terrific book. It is a page turner. Once you start it, you don't want to stop. It has the ring of truth and honesty. And I thank you very much for writing it. Let me ask you, do you feel somehow now that you are the custodian of your family or the historian, that you're the survivor,
Oh, yeah.
and so you're left to tell the story?
Right. Well, there is the old last man standing situation as well, but I was always the custodian of the family archives. Even when everybody was running around, I was the one that maintained the archives and the facilities. And my mother's eventually, when I became a teenager, I started to understand what she was doing when she was collecting. Go to camera one just for a second. So like, if you look at the room I'm in, there's all these costumes around me. And this is what was her passion. That's good. I just wanted to give him a taste. She was passionate about preserving Hollywood history. And that was an infectious dream that was given to my sister, unlike COVID, but in a good way, given to Carrie and I. And I haven't been able to shake it. And so I became the keeper of the stuff. And over the years, became very passionate about it. And then as it relates to the personal side of it, the family side, I, of course, maintained the family. It's like the presidential library. We literally have tens of thousands of documents and photographs in these archives, and most of which are scanned, but not all of which. So when it came time, when my mother and sister exited the planet, there became this immediate urgency, I felt, to get this thing out, especially for some of the people that were going to go after Carrie. I really wanted to get in front of that with solid truth and matters of the heart. And I knew that other people were going to take a stupid look at that. And so consequently, the urgency came, and I started to just write stories. And Carrie and I had actually written a script called 813 Greenway Drive, which is a coming of age story of Carrie and I, which actually provided the material for one or two chapters, kind of spread out a little bit. And but it went on, of course. The book tells the entire saga. But the notion of being the keeper of the stories, that is an ancient tradition through mankind, that there's always the storyteller that hands down the story to the next person. And my mother was the storyteller, and she handed down that to me to be the keeper of the stories. And I felt like that's why I had to do the book, to get the things that she hadn't said. Both Carrie and my mother wrote a lot of books, Carrie in particular. But I knew I had a unique perspective of, my viewpoint was a little different than theirs. Let's put it that way.
But after their deaths, one on top of the other, did you feel right away an urgency to write the book? Did it take you time?
Oh, I did. No, I knew I had to. Yeah, because I was like, wow, I knew Carrie hadn't finished with all of her storytelling. She was, if you look at Carrie's books, they have little snippets of time. They're not biographies. My mother wrote biographies of her journeys, but due to the way books are, you think a book is going to get it all out. In fact, I thought I was going to get all of this out. And I, by the way, that's a 400-page book, and I have probably 400 pages on the ground that I had to edit out, not because of any of the reason that it made it flow the way you were talking about. It was good editing. I mean, but there's a lot of stories to tell. I mean, you can imagine.
But you tell the stories that keep the story going, so it doesn't get bogged down. The characters are very clear. But I have to say, after reading the book, you were really very lucky, because you did not have a mommy dearest. You had the opposite.
Well, that's right. No, you're right. But many of my friends in Hollywood, quote unquote, Beverly Hills, whatever, had very self-absorbed parents, to be nice. My mother was absorbed with Carrie and I. That was her passion and her pride. And it was more than evident, because it's how she lived her life. She took us from city to city, country to country, set to set, wherever we were. She was very, very attentive as a mother. And the only thing she couldn't do was bake, but she could hire the chef that could bake. So you're off on that one as well. So no, there was no finer mother that I ever observed or have ever observed since.
And that comes through in the book. She's consistent as a mother. It's not as though she's there some days and then she forgets about you. It's consistent. It never changes.
And you know, there's a lot said about Carrie and her having issues at times. But one thing that would have happened towards the end in particular is Carrie would have been more than on board with my version of who Debbie was. Carrie at a certain age was hung up on the fact that maybe Debbie used to drink to unwind or this or that. And she was very critical of that because of her own drug and alcohol problems. So that was a problem for her, not for me, because I got it. You know, when you're constantly under assault and alone as a woman, as she was so much in her life, you know, she had to unwind. And when you do the shows, those of you in show business, you know that it takes time to unwind after a show. I always understood the idea of having a couple glasses of wine to unwind. I never judged it. Carrie couldn't stand it because at times she could get maudlin. We'd start talking about Harry Carl or something like that. It used to drive Carrie bats. But I never got tired of those stories. They were always fascinating.
But in the book, what's very clear is that your relationship to your mother was unchanging, and your sister's relationship to your mother was more complicated, and it went through hills and valleys. At the end, very close. But there were problems before there was a final and deep reconciliation, whereas you were always close to your mother. It never changed.
Yeah, that's true. And I can't explain it entirely other than my mother and I bonded, you know, very early, and I never bonded with my dad. I think Carrie got a little bit of the split bond early on where she wanted to get the accolades or the connection with Eddie. And that was a never ending deal. It was never going to happen. So I was a little more grounded because I had bonded with my mom, and, you know, we were best friends my whole life, you know, for sure. I mean, and I was there for her and she was there for me. And Carrie used to watch all of this, but never quite understood it until way later. It took her many years to get past her own things to where she could realize how cool Debbie was and how much my mother.
She got it in the end. She got it in the end. No.
Yeah, and in the documentary Bright Lights, you can see Carrie with her and the fact that she now really appreciates who my mother is. I mean,
you feel the deep connection. You're very kind to your mother, and it doesn't feel at all anything other than sincere. But you are pretty tough on your dad. You don't have any good words for him as a father. Your sister sort of developed an affection for him, but I don't think you ever did.
Well, look, I really liked him. I even loved him in a way, but as you mentioned an important word there, you know, the father aspect was void. So I never really looked at that aspect of it, but I liked him as a person very much. He was very, very, very fun and very entertaining and very engaging when you were with him. But the moment that you were out of the room, it's like you didn't exist. And so it's not a good person to connect with because you are going to get let down. And so in that sense, my sister got hurt, and that pisses me off because there was an ability to control that he chose not to control. But I don't judge him. You know, he had a very complicated life himself. But when you're a self-absorbed person, as he was, there's going to be collateral damage. I mentioned earlier how I had friends that had parents much like him, and most of them were heavily damaged because of that. Fortunately, I had my mother who was not even, you know, she was not like that at all. Eddie, though, you would have loved him. I mean, if you didn't know him, or those of you that do know him, he was a wonderful guy. So I don't have a lot to say in terms of his family capabilities, but as a person, he was a blast.
But I always felt that your sister bonded with him because Carrie, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, seemed Jewish. Her spirit was Jewish. Her timing was Jewish. Her intonations were, I'm Jewish. Her intonations were Jewish. I recognized her as a fellow traveler. And
yeah,
I think she even once said she got that from your father. You didn't inherit that.
No, I do. I think we both have a little of that, but it's actually more than from my dad. My mother was very drawn, not just to Jewish men, but to the Jewish culture. We were brought up with a lot of Jewish culture. I mean, we knew words like mitzvah and mensch and all these things, you know, so we were brought up very much involved. My you know, Harry Carl was Jewish. his mother was very Jewish and very, a beautiful person. She lived into her 90s, but, you know, and heavy Jewish accent. And she lived at the Roosevelt Hotel down at the beach and in Venice Beach, and a Cadillac Hotel. And everybody in that hotel was Jewish. And we used to go visit them all the time. And so there was all these, we'll call them old Jews, you know, telling Jew stories, and we loved it. It was a blast. And so, and the Friars Club and all of that. I mean, I grew up around this my whole life. So to us, you know, we're very much Jewish in many ways. And you're right, Carrie does reflect some of that in her writing. Yeah, I probably don't write it like she did, but the way she looked at some things very much was like that look at it.
Yeah. And when she did Star Wars, she was very unsure about it. I mean, the audition, when they made the film, they had no idea that it was going to be this legendary film. And is it true you were with her at the opening screening at Fox or Grauman's Chinese?
No, well, both, but the first one was Fox. There was a pre-screening at Fox for everybody, and nobody knew what to expect, at least of all Carrie, because she had seen a few rushes where there was no effects. So to her, it just looked like a bad science fiction B movie. And she was literally in the parking lot with me at Fox, panicking that she didn't want to go in the room. And I kept saying, we got to go get a seat. It's filling up. And we waited to the last second, literally till the lights went down, and snuck into the front row and sat in that front row. And then the battle cruiser flew over. And I looked at her and said, this is not a B movie. And, you know, but she, you know, she had no clue. And I honestly, in the parking lot, she was saying to me things like, well, I can go back into performing and singing with Mom, you know, or I'll do a nightclub act if this acting thing doesn't pan out.
When I saw your mother on Broadway in Woman of the Year, and she came out for her curtain call, and she loved to talk to the audience, she pointed to somebody, I know it was a setup job in the front row, and she said, this young woman doesn't know who I am, but I'm going to tell her I'm Princess Leia's mother. Yeah,
so that became one of her pat lines. I use the line. I mean, a lot of times I'll walk up on stage and I'll say, I'm Princess Leia's brother, or I'm Darth Vader's nephew. And, you know, people think that's amusing. I've had little kids walk up to me and say, you're Princess Leia's brother, so you're Luke Skywalker, right? You know, and I go, no. So not quite. I am Carrie's brother, though. My mother loved that line. And, you know, there was another generation of people that didn't know my mother at that moment. But as you well know, she went on to do films like Halloween Town and other films like In and Out and
Mother,
you know, on and on. And that Halloween Town series introduced her to an additional generation of film viewers, and little kids would walk up to her in the airport and say, Aunt Aggie, Aunt Aggie. I mean, it was remarkable. That's 7 decades of entertaining different generations of people, even though you're only 39 years old.
You mentioned in the book that Carrie thought your mother was competitive with her, but you thought the truth was exactly the opposite, that Carrie was competitive with your mother. It wasn't your mother that was ever competitive.
Yeah, you know who said it best? Because obviously I'm very inside and I have my own, that is my opinion. But Richard Dreyfuss was with me. We were doing a Q&A together, and he even saw that. And, you know, he went to school at the same schools and knew Carrie and I for many, many years. And he was, as you know, was in Postcards from the Edge. We became friends after that. But he even knew that the competition was one-sided. My mother, I knew from what I saw, because I would talk to my mother about it, and she would say, now, dear, you know, we have to be very careful with Carrie. We don't want to lose her. And that was a mantra that went on for 40 years because we were afraid that if you pushed Carrie or did something, it might drive her to use or to go into depression. You know, she walked a very, very fine line in life. And my mother was always afraid. And therefore, when you looked at the way that she related to my mother, it didn't shock me that she would perceive that there was some competition. But, you know, you're the daughter of Debbie Reynolds. That's not an easy act to follow. I always say, why do you need to follow the act at all? They used to say, what's it like being in the shadow of Debbie Reynolds? I say, she gives great shade. I mean, you know what I mean? Why do you why do you worry about such things? I mean, I always felt it was an honor to be part of her world. And the world that she lived was a beautiful, very, very authentic, filled with values and charity and love and things that are less discernible these days. You know, we're in a tough time right now. She always rose above those things.
Did you have any hesitation at all about being completely honest about Carrie's drug addiction and her mental illness? Was there any?
No, I don't, because it's a great point, because a lot of people are like, hey, that's none of your business. But since Carrie wrote about it in like 3 of her books, I feel that it's okay to talk about it. I generally, when I wrote in my book, you'll notice that I'm sort of I tread on ground that she already treaded on. Yes, I know certain things that aren't in the book, but a lot of it is, as Carrie used to say, our family wears its underwear on the outside of our clothes. And that really is about living a life in public since we were born. We belonged to the public, and the public owned our mother or jointly owned her. And so we were very much involved with that. And Carrie, later in life, felt that she had a duty to talk about her mental illness and her drug issues because she realized it helped people. I mean, she didn't think that at first, but after like 1,000 people come up to you and say, oh my God, I'm so thankful that you wrote about this or that, or come out with that because it makes it okay for me. When you hear that enough times, pretty soon you go, wow, I might be making a difference here. She knew she was making a difference. And so when I wrote about it, it was already ground that had been tread on by her. However, like when the news came out after Carrie's death months later, that they had found drugs in her system, they called me on the phone, somebody from the UP or wherever they were from, and they said, oh, what do you think about the coroner's report, says drugs were in Carrie's system? I was like, yeah. Well, what do you think about it? I said, I don't see the news. Oh, Carrie did drugs. Wow, there's news there. I said, did they bother to read any of her books? I mean, she's always talked about it. She was open about the drug problem. And for those of you that are not bipolar, you can't understand what it's like to live in a world where your moods are wildly out of control. So you are always striving to stay within the normal zone. And so self-medicating became part of her world. And although it be unsafe, it was part of her world. Some of it was prescribed, some of it wasn't. But the truth is, she maintained and created amazing things while under this umbrella of mental illness. I mean, it's remarkable what she was able to do. Remarkable. I mean, she's more heroic in my mind, and I'm pretty high up on the scale with my mom. I think she's more heroic than the Molly Brown thing, because Carrie did everything she did while under the envelope of mental illness, whereas my mother was, unhindered in any way.
I feel it was Carrie's illness was painful for your mother. Always. It was an issue for her. It was hard for her.
Sure. Oh, it was heartbreaking. In Bright Lights, there's a moment where she looks at the camera and she goes, it's hard. She's talking about what it's like to be a mother of a child like that. And she's like, she breaks it. And she struggled with it. I mean, man, it was really hard because you're constantly worried. Look, there's lots of people, especially as it relates to drugs, that used to use the term, this tough love thing. And she had friends that used tough love on their children, and those children were no longer with us. Now, I'm not going to judge what they did, but I'm telling you that had my mother taken a different tact, maybe Carrie doesn't live to be 60 years old. Maybe she's gone way sooner. I mean, it all started when I was in my 20s. So I watched this show for a long time.
How is it you survived that? You didn't get addicted to alcohol or drugs, or you didn't have those issues?
No, I'm more like my mother. I was around her so much, and I think it's a good thing. I took from my grandfather and other people, but I'm very much like my mother. My mother was very much in control at all times, and I'm like that. Even if my mother was having a drink, she still stays in control, and that is how I am. I like to stay in control. I like to be in a position where, the circumstances aren't controlling me.
Did you feel growing up with world famous parents that you had a destiny to become world famous yourself?
I never felt the need. Never. I mean, I was given a lot of opportunities along the way. I did some acting. I started a show and did other things, and it never was my passion to be there. There are certain things that come with the lunch. When you become an actor and all of that, you do give up certain privacies and parts of your life. You have no choice. It just comes with it. So consequently, I chose to stay a little bit behind the scenes. I was able to support them. The truth is they were both required a lot of attention and maintenance. So it did become my job sort of to maintain and help them in the supporting role. In fact, I write in my book in the very beginning of why I was brought into this earth. My mother chased my father down to sleep with him one time, ended up getting pregnant with me, and knew that she was pregnant with me, and brought me into this world to be a companion to Carrie, because she didn't want Carrie to be an only child. Now, when it was time to leave the earth and Carrie had left, my mother looked at me and said, I have to go be with Carrie. She knew she had to go somewhere where I couldn't go at that moment. And then she said, I hope you're going to be okay with that. I'm like, I didn't know what she was talking about, because I don't know what person calls their exit like that. But those were her words. She brought me in to take care of Carrie. When the time came, she went to be with Carrie. I mean, it was always about making sure Carrie was okay.
You suggest in the book that your mother, in a sense, willed her own death at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting, I'm telling you that's what happened.
Telling.
I mean, I am a technical person. You know, I mean, I have a very technical background, so I don't buy into stuff. I'm not a big conspiracy guy unless you can really prove something to me. I mean, but so when my mother, you know, I think she left the earth the way she did with me sitting this far away from her, because she knew that if had something else had happened and I hadn't seen it like that, I wouldn't have believed it, or I would have thought that there was foul play. But everything she did was right in front of my face, and the words that were spoken right to me. And then she just literally laid down and went to sleep. And I watched her go to sleep, and within a matter of minutes, she left the planet, technically. We took her to the hospital, all that, but the doctor said that she had already left the building, so to speak. And it was all done, as much as it was horrifying on one level, it was also magical and beautiful on another. And only in retrospect was it so. As I thought back, what a gift it was that she gave me to just, I mean, who can call it like that? Who can say, you know, this is what I'm going to go do, and then literally speak these words to me and then leave? You know, and literally like just check out the way you would check out of a hotel room. Gone.
But those couple of days must have been almost unbelievable for you. The whole world was stunned. You must have been more than stunned.
I wasn't more stunned. I think the world was more stunned than me. I had lived with them my whole life. So I'd seen these miraculous things, especially from my mother, many times. I'd seen Carrie survive a million things. I did not believe Carrie was going to die. I didn't. I mean, I'd seen it all before, many times. Not once, not twice, many times. So when I saw her sitting there like that, she looked pretty good to me. And I thought, oh, she's just going to wake up at any moment. When she didn't wake up, I thought, wow, okay, you just pushed the envelope one time too many. I mean, it's like Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier. I mean, she's just pushing that envelope. And this last time she pushed it and didn't survive. I could accept that. I didn't like it because Carrie and I had plans. We knew we were going to lose our mother. We knew that the year before she'd had a stroke and she wasn't in the best of health. So we knew we were just a few years away from losing her. And we had made all these plans as brothers and sisters do. We were only a year and a half apart. And so to have that end abruptly was heartbreaking. More so. My mother was less heartbreaking because, I mean, she literally did what she wanted to do. I mean, how do you take that away from her? I mean, yes, I mourn the loss, but I celebrate the way it was done.
You make a wonderful point in the book. Your mother was taken advantage of by some men and taken advantage of financially. And you said she was incapable of duplicity. So she never suspected that other people would be that way because she couldn't possibly have been that way. And so she was fooled a number of times. And she paid a big price financially for believing people she shouldn't have believed.
Yeah, there is a price to be paid as you go through life. You can be hard as nails. You can be driven to that. You can build walls because you can be driven to that. But she chose to remain vulnerable because it was her job to connect with her people, her audience. And so I don't think she could afford to build those walls and then remain who she was. When she stepped into an audience, in front of an audience or in an audience, I never have seen anybody better at it than her. She immediately connected with those people like nobody's business. It was incredible, the bond that she had with her people. And I think part of her vulnerability was also what was so attractive about her and why she was able to connect like that. As she said later in her life, as it related to men, her picker is broken. And I always thought that was a cute thing to say. But if you really think about it, she's just saying, I don't know how to really pick people, men for myself. I mean, and just accepted that in the later part of life. That's sad. But it isn't really sad, like many cases of people that are alone, because she always had this huge extended family that adored her. And men would line up by the hundreds to just touch her and greet her and get her signature and have a photograph with her by the thousands, I mean, hundreds a night. And it was remarkable. So for a woman that didn't have a man, she had thousands.
I want to talk about the Las Vegas experience. You were CEO of the Debbie Reynolds Hotel. Was that overall, would you say that was a good experience for you and for your mother?
Well, there were parts of it that were wonderful because it really would have been a great thing. It's a crying shame that she had to be taken advantage of in certain categories there the way she was, because that thing would have been alive to this day. And it was a remarkable way. So imagine this, she wanted a place of her own where she could just perform whenever she wanted to, or all the time, or not all the time, and her friends could come and be with her or not be with her. And we set up a really cool lounge like the old days, and Keely Smith would be there with her, and they'd be jamming with a quartet at 2 a.m. for free after the show, like old Vegas. I mean, you'd expect any moment Sammy Davis to walk up. You know, it was a remarkable time. Steve Wynn would hang out there, and other people that they wouldn't even be at their own hotels. We had created this old Vegas thing, and she had this dream and vision to do that. And it was a beautiful thing. And it was a shame that it couldn't carry on because of bad husbands and a few other bad apples that were also in the bunch that took advantage of her.
They took advantage of your mother. And she was a good sport about it all the time.
So when that whole thing was heating up, as I've discovered a lot of the fraud that was going on, and it really started to heat up over there. It eventually ended up in courtrooms, and some people were talking, about me in this courtroom. And when it got to be my time, I looked over at this attorney and I said, "She's Tammy. I'm not. Make no mistake. I am not Tammy, and we will not be playing the games that you've been playing anymore. Game over." And it became my mission, to protect her. I mean, it always had been my thing since I was a teenager to protect her. But now I was all of a sudden 30 years old, and I was in the middle of a SHIT storm. And I tell you, it just got my gander up. And, I was in kick-ass mode. We fired 200 people in one day.
Mm-hmm. They had all taken advantage of her, of the situation.
There were people working there that were really nice people that were stealing blatantly from her. And it was like, I would bring them into my office and I'd be like, I mean, she trusted you. We're a family. It's a small company. What do you think you're doing? Well, everybody was doing it, they would say. Oh, okay. Well, then it's okay, right? I mean, it's the same mentality that is right now permeating into a lot of cities around this country.
I want to ask you about your mother's lifelong interest in the motion picture collection. She wanted a museum. A through line in the book is you get close to establishing a museum, it looks ready to go, it falls apart. It looks ready to go, it falls apart. But in the end, you make a wonderful point that her collection, which she couldn't place into a museum, ended up saving her.
That it did. It saved, and it saved Carrie too, because at the time Carrie was having a hard time financially. So it did. And but the dream, the Hollywood Museum dream, started way back with Mary Pickford and all of that, and they passed it on to her. And by the MGM auction days, she was saying, "That's it. We're going to do something about this." Harold Lloyd, left his whole estate to be a museum, and they just sold it off, and a lot of other sorry deals like that. So there was never to be a museum after many, many attempts, and she had amassed 3,000 costumes. Every Academy Award nominated or winning film since the silent era forward, since the beginning of the Academy. But every single significant film, even back into the silent era, from Blood and Sand, from Valentino and Chaplin, and you name it. I mean, it was an amazing collection. It had taken us decades and every penny we had. And it was a dream that wasn't to be. I still retain a lot of my mother's things. They're around me right now, some of these items. And I feel like I'm the custodian of what remains. The only reason why these costumes remain is because when she was doing the auction, I owned these costumes. That I had bought a lot of the Debbie costumes personally. And so when it came time to do the auction, she said, "Well, we're going to sell those." And I was like, I don't really think I'm going to sell those. She's like, "Well, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to wear them or something?" I was like, "No, they're your costumes. I'll figure it out some other day. It's for another time, another day." So I'm surrounded right now by Debbie costumes and some of Carrie's things. And I have a huge collection. Yeah, you could see that there. Well, did you go to the wide shot? Yeah. So I'll do this wide, but this is Debbie's costume from Susan Slept Here. It's a really cute little movie, RKO. And if you know my mother's history, it's where she was working for Howard Hughes and during this movie. And there was a guy named Michael Wolff who was the costume designer. And my mother literally went to Wolff and said, "I want to take a costume to a party that we already finished shooting the scene. Can I borrow that costume?" He's like, "No, dear, Debbie, that's not how we do this. We don't take costumes from the movies to parties unless they want you to." But anyway, she literally stole a costume to wear to a party. And I actually have the costume. If you stay wide, I'll get the costume. So this was the dress. I see now, this is part of what I meant about finding these things, right? So I went, this came up at an auction. It was an RKO dress from Susan Slept Here, and Michael Wolff verified that this is the costume that she stole and wore to the party. I was like, I'm not going to get rid of that. That's too good of a freaking story. So I write about it in my book, and here's the dress to go with it. Well, you can't beat that, right?
Where do you think your mother's commitment to preserving film history came from? Really, from the Golden Age stars, she cared more than anybody else about preserving the history of the studio era.
I can't speak for what everybody else went through, but think about this. My mother was a fan before she was ever dreaming about being a movie star. She never, ever dreamed of being a movie star. She dreamed of being a gym teacher and going to the movies for 10 cents over at the El Portal Theater. That was the extent of her dreams. But she wins this contest and becomes a star, and the rest is history. But that's also what gave her that appreciation, because she was a fan before she was a star. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to travel that road to gain that appreciation. I didn't, but she did. She knew everybody because she was a fan. And then one day instead of watching Gary Cooper, she was at a party with him. Instead of watching Betty Davis and Now Voyager, she was in a movie with her. I mean, that's the stuff that dreams are made of, right?
But then when she became famous, she was terrifically loyal to her studio and to MGM. And she cared more than anybody else. And people should know that.
Yeah, really so cared. That's a very interesting point, because the word loyal is another one of these values that is a diminishing value. And today people don't have loyalty like they did. She had tremendous loyalty because she understood values. She understood family, country, duty. There's all these words. They don't really mean anything unless you back them up. My mother early in her career decides, she's going to go to Korea, and entertain the troops. Not because she ordered to, they just asked if you'd like to. She's still a teenager, or maybe she's 20 at the most. And, Keenan Wynn says to her, "Oh, I don't know if you really are up for this." And she goes, "No, I'm in." So she goes to Korea 4 different times, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because it was her civic duty, because it was something she could do to give back to the sacrifice that was being made by others. And man, she always maintained that through her life. I mean, even at the hotel days, we had big events, during Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and she would let everybody in who was a veteran and put on a special show for the veterans. She did that her whole life. She felt a connection to her community, to her family, to her country. It's just not, I don't see that as being as prevalent in the teaching culture today as it was. And I got to watch her live that, okay? So you can imagine I'm a pretty major flag waver. Because of her. I just look at what she did and the way she lived her life, and I thought it was beautiful and honorable.
I want to say I have 2 stories about your mother. Do you remember an actress at MGM? She was Finnish. Her name's Tina Elg. Do you know that name?
No, I don't.
She was at MGM in 1954, 55. She came from Finland, and she said she was feeling very lost and very uncared for. And she said there was one person who went out of her way to welcome her to MGM and treated her like a member of the family. And she said she was such a good girl. Guess who that person was?
I have no doubt. She was like that because there were people that treated her that way too. I tell the story of Fred Astaire pulling her out from underneath the piano on this rehearsal stage and taking him to his rehearsal stage, and how he encouraged her. There were others, but she was encouraged by people too. There were people.
Did she talk to you ever about Louis B. Mayer? I think she owes her career to him because he went to bat for her on Singing in the Rain. He said, "I want her." Dean Kelly didn't want her.
No, I know that story
Louis
well.
B. Mayer wanted her and absolutely insisted that she was going to play that role.
So there's a little bit more to that story that I don't know if I got into it in my book. I can't remember. But Lillian Sidney, who was George Sidney's wife, former wife, at that time they were still married. She was the right-hand assistant to Louis B. Mayer, and Lillian was had his ear, and Lillian was the one that spotted Debbie early on, and got Louis B. Mayer looking at Debbie. And she was the first real woman executive without the title in Hollywood, at least the way it's explained to me by both Lillian and my mom. I think she was sort of a silent executive at MGM, but she was assisting him, and she was the one that spotted Debbie and helped build up her career. And they were lifelong friends, Lillian, another Jewish lady, by the way.
Did your mother speak well of Mr. Mayer?
Yes, always. In fact, I'm not so much, I don't know how much she would like, the new Judy movie because of some of that stuff. My mother obviously was never treated that way. And she was always treated very respectfully and as a major asset of the company. Now, you are treated as an asset, but nonetheless, respectfully.
Yes. What would you say, looking back, is your mother's best work? And did you know what she wanted most to be remembered for?
Well, we all know that, let's see here. We all know the Unsinkable Molly Brown. I got that one for you. Let's see. Yep, there she goes. I'll come down. There you go. So that's the nomination.
Oscar nomination.
Yeah, and I've got the costume over here and the costume sketch. But in many ways, that was her favorite role. It's also very iconic, in terms of her personality is very similar in a lot of things. And I also love the story of the director saying to her, I don't want you for this part, In fact, when they met in person, I believe it was Charles Walter said, Debbie, you're much too small for this part. And she says, how small is the part? No. You're too small physically. So she always twisted. She knew that what he meant, but she was messing with him. But the moral of the story is she knew dynamite comes in small packages. The old expression, it's not the size of the dog, the size of the bite in the dog. And I'm telling you, my mother, you didn't want to piss her off. I told stories in my book about her punching some guys out and stuff and knocking them down. I mean, she was a force. But as far as acting goes, there are certain movies that I think this is now my opinion, not necessarily hers, but in my opinion, The Catered Affair, Gore Vidal, Ernest Borgnine, Bette Davis. I feel like that's a great dramatic role for her. It was also very influential for her working with Bette Davis for the second time, but it's a great, great role for her. I also love Goodbye Charlie a lot, and that part, interestingly enough, was going to go to Marilyn Monroe. I don't know if you know that, but in fact, this is the one time I got Robert Osborne. We were obviously friends with Robert Osborne, and he was, when it came to trivia or anecdotal history of Hollywood, nobody could beat him. But I got him with this one because nobody knew that my mother took over for Marilyn Monroe to do Goodbye Charlie. And I thought that was, the only reason why I know it is I bought a costume sketch, and it was Marilyn Monroe as Charlie for Goodbye Charlie, 20th Century Fox. Nobody knew that. But I really think Goodbye Charlie is great. I obviously love Molly Brown. Now, when it comes to
Singing in the Rain is the iconic one. That's
okay. So I have a lot of
musical ever.
Yeah. So
number one.
But I just told you about two movies that are not musical for a reason, though, because everybody knows Singing in the Rain is, in my opinion, the most iconic musical ever made. I know all the musicals. Trust me, I grew up on them all. There's a lot of great musicals, some not so good, some that don't make any sense at all, but they're great. But I'll tell you, that movie makes sense, and it's the great musical and the great American musical, and I love it. And I think I have all her costumes in that movie, by the way. I have three of them. I have the Good Morning number, and I also have Gene and Donald's from that. Then I have her You Were Meant for Me, where they're on the soundstage with the violet light blowing, the chiffon dress. And then I have the All I Do Is Dream of You, where they're throwing the little pink outfit in the beginning of the movie where she throws the pie. So those are the three costumes that have survived that I have control of. Those will be lent to the Academy for the museum. We'll figure out which ones and when and whatever. They obviously know that's the thing she'll always be remembered for more than anything else. But there's a big body of work there. Like sitting right now in the room in front of me is a couple of costumes with Gower Champion and my mom from Give a Girl a Break. Bob Fosse is also in that movie. It's this costume here. This is the Give a Girl a Break stuff. And in the background is Bob Fosse's outfit as well. So there's some amazing dance numbers, in these movies, incredible dance numbers. But as an overall musical, they make less sense than that. But Give a Girl a Break is cool. It's like Singing in the Rain because it's a movie about a girl trying to get a break in the live theater. So it kind of makes sense that you're singing and dancing and rehearsing all the time rather than Molly Brown, which is a bunch of people singing out of left field in many ways.
Right. They're not performers. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's like, what are you doing all of a sudden breaking out into song in my face? Sometimes musicals, like out of nowhere, people start saying, you were meant for me. It's like, what were we singing now? So they don't always make sense, musicals.
In your mother's list, I don't want to forget How the West Was Won. That's a nearly 3-hour Cinerama epic, and your mother carries the whole film.
And that was shall we say, not intended to be. When the movie was being contemplated originally, her role was much smaller, and then it got expanded out as they started working together. He was like, wow, this girl can do it all. And a lot of those singing numbers that you see is my mother ad-libbing and then it turning into a number. I have Cinerama camera number 5, and I have her costume, the old lady costume as she gets much older, and I have one of the younger costumes. I have 2 costumes from How the West Was Won. But the camera means a lot to me. Now, I was on the set of that movie, which I can't say about every movie, but Molly Brown, that movie, I was on the set. I even have some home movies, actually, from that, which I could actually share with you. Would you like to see a home movie, little short home movie from How the West Is Won? Does that intrigue you at all?
I think so.
Well, I think what happened is over the years, these home movies, here's the video section. So do you have ability to go full screen on this one back there?
I'll go out of TV.
Yeah, go for it. So hit it. There you go. So this is the set. This is Debbie's Meadow up above Ridgeway, Colorado. And there's my mom there with Carrie and I, our little blue outfits and the wagons. And you hear the score for How the West Is Won playing in the background. Hopefully it's not too loud. But these are, my grandmother's actually taking these films. But the Cinerama camera was there. And that's the sequence. I have more, but I'm not going to do all night thing. That's the sequence where Robert Preston says to my mother and proposes to her by saying, you know, childbearing for you come like rolling off a log. And then she says, well, frankly, I'd rather roll off a log. And that was that sequence that was shot up in that meadow. Then later, much later on, other films were shot up there like True Grit and things like that. So it became a favorite spot. So
what would you say is Carrie's best work on screen? Your favorite?
When Harry Met Sally. I think I like it because it's actual work. I mean, there are things that are going on in Star Wars that are all very entertaining, and it's a type of a role. But, you know, I always tell the story about, they're like, what do you think about Carrie getting chosen by George Lucas to you know, play the space princess? And I said, well, Carrie was raised to be a princess since she was a little girl. Literally, my mother was always sort of treating her and raising her as this little Beverly Hills princess. So when Carrie walked in that audition room for George, you know, she carried that attitude. She was a princess. I mean, you know, it was typecasting. So when I see Carrie doing the thing that she does, it is Carrie. I mean, when she's in Darth Vader's face, it's very Carrie. I love all that. But when you talk about real acting and fun stuff, that's really good. Some, you know, she did a lot of other fun movies like the Blues Brothers. I mean, but that's all very campy. But when it comes to acting, I mean, that's probably one of her best, I think.
She's very, very good in Hannah and Her Sisters. Woody Allen cast her because she had just the right tone for it. And she did. It's a terrific little part.
You're right. And that's when she became friends with Meg Ryan, and they became lifelong friends. I mean, you know, she never got like a big role. Think about it. Where's the big starring role after Star Wars? Right? So no one ever saw her as a leading lady the way that George is. So in many ways, Star Wars affected her ongoing career in a negative way. If you're trying to, because Carrie had some depth as an actress. I mean, people don't understand. She's pretty good. I mean, she had some range. She was trained at the London Dramatic Academy. She had some range. You know, she could do, you know, Elizabethan English stuff if you wanted her to. I just think she was underrated and never really given an opportunity to do a lot of dramatic stuff. Unlike my mother, who, you know, really pushed her way to get those roles. If my mother wasn't who she is, she would have never done Molly Brown. You had to get in the director's face. The Singing in the Rain thing, she would have collapsed under the table and never come out. There would have been no Singing in the Rain if she wasn't who she was. But we were brought up by a very powerful, my grandfather raised us all and trained us all with one simple philosophy. And it was a Reynolds philosophy, he used to call it, but there is no word can't in our vocabulary. Now, I didn't know this because I had been trained separately very young with that philosophy, but he also had trained my mother and her brother, etc. So we were raised by him. I was very influenced by my grandfather, who really influenced my mother more than anybody, in our family.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place to stop because I don't want to be selfish. Love talking to you, Todd. This is a fabulous book, folks. Really, it's a terrific book. It's so honest and fresh, and you can't stop reading it. But Mark, do we want to open the house to some questions?
I have a few questions. First of all,
just 1 second, Mark. Can he give a little tour of the costumes and the the knickknacks that he has there, all the wonderful things he has
See
surrounding him.
I'll tell you what we'll do. Yeah, so let me see what I don't know what I can, okay, so it's pretty far away. Let me show Ryan how to zoom in. You see that? I'm going to give him control of the camera. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to give him control of camera 1 so you can zoom in. Here is camera, just hit 1.
Mm-hmm.
And now here is, watch camera 1, zoom and pan.
Oh, yeah.
So we can do a little, hit up, let's do, is 1 up there? Yeah, 1 is up. So what I just did was I had him just for fun, zoom in on Give a Girl a Break. You can pan that over a little bit. Looks like it's not quite centered. And you could see right there, zoom in a little bit. So there is the costume of Debbie wearing that costume. And there is the costume, yep. And I could turn on another light there, but then we have, let's see, so I'll tell you what, pan over to this side. We'll do this one real quick. There's a few things on this side of the room. So on this side of the room, you've got the Give a Girl a Break costume, and I can hold this up, you'll see it real well. There's the costume sketch. And when I take that down, there's the costume. And then of course there's a little R2-D2 back there. I don't know if you could see Dwight. Pan down, let's see if we see Dwight. Come here, Dwight. This is Debbie's dog, Dwight, hiding behind her. He's a good boy. Can you see him hiding back there? That's so funny. There you go. That's Dwight. He was hanging out the whole time with us. Let's see. Now, this one over here, I'm going to have to move out for you. Come on to this side. I'm going to move this costume. This is worth bringing out forward, so I'll bring it forward for you. So you recognize that costume is Belly Up to the Bar Boys from the Unsinkable Molly Brown. And here's the costume sketch for that. And then when I take it away, there's the dress. There's some really, that's Morton Hack's design. There's some really interesting stuff online of the process of costume design with that particular movie. What else is up here that's interesting?
You have Carrie's, what was it, the wand?
Oh, I have Carrie's lightsaber that she never got to use. Yeah, I'll move this. You can come back. I blocked my own view here. So so this, as you know, Carrie, towards the end there was going to be, and was a Jedi, but there was, she was going to do a lightsaber scene. This was her lightsaber. It never got to be used on camera. What else have we got? C-3PO behind. Ah, yes, this is worth showing. So we've got, now this is Debbie's Gene Herschel Lifetime Achievement Award. And so that's kind of a fun item. And you don't see too many of those because they don't always give them out. And then there's my mother's pair of the ruby slippers, which I will pick up, which I didn't do earlier because I didn't have the white gloves, but now I do. So we were using white gloves long before coronavirus. Here we go. So there's the ruby slippers. I'll stand up for that so you can see that. And what do? There's no place like home. But you can see here, it's got the labels in it. And this was a pair that Debbie, it's the only piece of memorabilia Debbie ever put in her house. She never had any costumes in her house. She had other things and antiques and things that she collected, but all of the costumes, or the thousands of costumes and all the fabulous props, she never had any of that in her homes because she collected all of that for us, not for her, not to decorate. It wasn't a personal collection of whatever. This was for all of us. But eventually these slippers ended up in her house with the Maltese Falcon. It's the only two pieces that were on her mantle. So she had like an Oscar, the SAG Lifetime Achievement Award, the ruby slippers. You know, she had a funny combination, a Rodin statue. You know, it was an interesting eclectic wall of stuff but she was not really into memorabilia for herself, just for us.
I have a question from Sandy Bangle about Debbie's nightclub sheet music arrangements. Have they been auctioned or are they still around?
I'm middle of this.
I have all of her sheet music, and it's thousands of sheets because I have every act she ever did from the early 60s forward, including the show Irene, the Broadway shows, every Vegas act ever. Jerry Fielding did a lot of the orchestrations and such. There's some amazing stuff from 24 pieces to 50 piece. I have every last orchestration fully intact in filing cabinets in my warehouse.
Doug Denoff had to leave. He left a message. Mazel tov, that's Yiddish for the book. Just pre-ordered my copy, paid retail.
Oh my gosh.
I have another.
Listen, I could have got him a deal. I could have got him a deal.
But he said you and he should catch up about Cook Lenses, Crazy Families, what my dad called, and he X'd it all out. Loved ones, bravo. Thanks for doing all this. Then I have a question from Karen Culp. Out of all your mother's memorabilia, which keepsake is the most special to you or makes you feel the most connected to her?
I think these slippers do because it was her favorite. And I will keep these because it was her favorite, not because it's my favorite. My favorite thing that I have is probably one of the Good Morning or like the Good Morning outfit. Why is that important? Well, it's obviously a fabulous number, but I love it because she gave it to me on my 25th birthday as a gift to me. So she had bought that costume and gave it to me, I guess partly in an effort to suck me into the dream further, but maybe there was something beyond the gift, but that was a gift to me. So it was the first dress I ever owned, for starters. But also it was really the first serious piece of memorabilia that I'd had. I had collected other things prior to that, but that was serious. And I didn't have anything really serious, but that was serious.
And then I have from Leslie Shreve, why not write another book and or create a TV show based on all of this?
Okay, so I can't say a lot about this, but you're probably going to see that book turned into a 20 or 30 part series. And it'll probably end up in one of the usual places where series end up, but we don't have that part. There's some of the people that were involved in Bright Lights are also involved in that. I could say that much, but there's that's in the works, and it will be literally sort of a cross between like, did you see the film with Joan Crawford and
Yes.
Betty Davis story?
Oh, yes.
So it has that feel to it in the sense of the nostalgic feel, but it would be, of course, much more of a tell-all, behind the scenes look, and also a coming of age story. I mean, Carrie, it's set, if you think about it, this whole book is like a coming of age story. Now it goes beyond that, but the first half plus of the book is Carrie and I observing this magical world called MGM and called Las Vegas. Now there's a lot of stuff in the book that we cut out about Las Vegas, the Sidney Korshak. So Robert Duvall in The Godfather is Sidney Korshak, who was the consigliere to the mafia, but who was really the entertainment liaison from the mafia to the entertainment industry. And Korshak was really involved in a lot of things in our life, indirectly or directly, both in Vegas and in Hollywood. So we take on a lot more of the underworld aspects of this from a historic standpoint, like Casino might do. So there's a lot of, you want it. In fact, I'd love, to see Scorsese direct the stuff that had to do with that. And since you're doing many parts, that would be very possible.
I have to say one of my favorite performances of your mother's, in addition to singing Lorraine, was her final performance behind the candelabra where you didn't recognize her. Nobody knew it was her.
Did you read that in my book? Right? Because the truth of the story is she had figured out this outfit herself because she knew Liberace's mother. So they say, you're going to play Liberace's mother. She's like, love it. Because first of all, I can do the Jewish woman beautifully, and I've got the clothes and the outfit. I'm going to do the whole thing. Well, I had forgotten about it, but like a month later, I get this text message with a photograph of this old woman, this old Jewish woman. And I looked at it and said, who the hell is sending me this picture of this old Jewish woman? And I'm telling you, I didn't even flash on it till hours later that it was her. So when your own son doesn't recognize you, you know you're doing a good thing.
That's acting.
She was, forget it. And I'll tell you another homage to Debbie on regards to that film. Tom Hanks, when I was at the Telluride Film Festival while we were doing Bright Lights, he ran up to me and he goes, you have to tell your mother that scene, her scenes in Candelabra were unbelievable. He loved it. So it took and same thing with Meryl Streep and others. I mean, the true actors really appreciated the depth that she had put into that small part, but she really poured herself into that little small part because she wanted it to be perfect, like all great actors.
And I'll toss it back to you, Foster.
Okay, this has just been terrific. If you have this series, Todd, do you get to say who plays you and Carrie and your mother?
Well, we'll see how much say. I certainly have somewhat of a say so. I have more creative control than Carrie and I had when we did Postcards from the Edge. Let's put it that way. That was a nightmare in terms of learning your lesson of being out of control. But it's certainly turned out to be a great movie. But this is going, and if you think about this movie, it sort of takes place around before and after Postcards from the Edge. In fact, the movie Postcards from the Edge will be in the series. But yeah, I'll have a lot more to say. I have a little more control now that I've got to be a little older, and I've gained knowledge and chutzpah.
You can find all of it in this book. So let's thank Todd. It was a wonderful interview. Thank you, Todd.
Hey, I've loved being here with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question, Todd. Who would you pick?
Yeah.
Who would you pick to play your mother and your sister in the movie?
I've tried not to overthink that too much. My mother would be really tough, especially since the span of it all. But like there's been, I kind of like Kate Hudson has got an interesting look. We thought about her. We thought about a few people. The question really is, who's actually got this talent? Now the world is full these days of great actors. But are there really triple threats or quadruple threats like there were in my mom's day? My mother, like Ginger Rogers is a quadruple threat, and my mother is a quadruple threat. I say, people don't hear that term, but I'm including comedy as the fourth wall. So, you have your acting, your singing, your dancing, but there's comedy as a whole other discipline. And I don't know that I see that today as much in certain places. It's just like what I was talking about the movie Judy. As much as that was a good film and everything was, they did great. I mean, doing Judy Garland's not easy. I mean, I knew Judy Garland. Obviously, my mother was good friends with her, and I saw her perform several times. I mean, I'm sorry, hard to do her, right? I mean, Judy Garland, hard to do her. Hard to do Debbie maybe, but I'm going to do my best. And I will say I was involved with my mother's dance school for many decades. And I've seen a lot of unrecognized talent go through those doors, people that can sing and dance and act. So it may not be a big superstar to play those parts. That may not be the play. I really want to look at it more pragmatically and look at the lower ranks. That's where my mother came from, right?
It shouldn't be anybody that we know. And a good place to end is your mother was known as America's sweetheart and the girl next door, and that she typified a certain kind of an American. But in the end, really, she was one of a kind, and it would be very hard for anybody to duplicate that. And it should be an unknown, not somebody we have any.
And I do have a tendency to agree with you on that. I do agree with you on that. Carrie, maybe, but again, look what happened with Carrie. I mean, she just eclipsed herself in the end. I mean, and then when she died and the world decided to make her the face of the rebellion and all the things that happened with her inspiring people. I mean, they both had pretty remarkable lives that are not easy to mimic, but isn't that what great actors are supposed to do?
Absolutely.
Well, with that, on behalf of the Lambs, Todd, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you,
And
Todd.
thank you all that have joined us. Check out the Lambs at our website. This video will get posted sometime tomorrow afternoon, so you can watch it again and again and again. And thank you, Foster.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Todd.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful. See you. Are you good? Okay.